He woke up and opened his eyes and found his unexpected reward, a sweet alien slave. Victor stretched as he blinked into wakefulness, his spine arching with a quiet groan as the morning hum of the dome settled into his ears. The air inside the habitat was cool, dense with the scent of moss-filtered humidity and the faint sterilized bitterness of nutrient gel. Pale green light filtered through the canopy overhead, bending through the dew-streaked dome panels and splashing shifting patterns onto the floor. It should have been just another morning. Systems check. Root growth survey. Silence. But someone was there. The breath caught in his throat mid-yawn. There, curled at the foot of his bed like some forgotten offering, lay a woman. Victor sat up fast, the synthetic blanket slipping from his chest as his heartbeat surged. She wasn't human. Her skin was a smooth, soft shade of sky blue, like moonlight refracted through water. Not uniform. Traces of violet shimmered beneath the surface like veins of color beneath frost. Her hair was striking, long, braided gold that cascaded over her shoulder and pooled like sunlight beside her. She wore only a ceremonial wrap of pale silk, barely sufficient for the dome's temperature. No shoes, no bag, nothing but the collar around her neck and the document sealed just beneath it. She didn't stir, but she wasn't sleeping. Victor had seen enough field biology to recognize tension. Her whole body held still, not with rest, but practiced discipline. Not limp, but locked, as if waiting for permission to breathe. For a moment, he just watched her, the way her fingers curled tightly inward against her chest, the way her lashes fluttered once, then stilled. Every motion, or lack of it, deliberate. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, bare feet against the cool composite floor, and approached her slowly. Kneeling beside her, he reached for the parchment tucked at her throat. It was sealed with wax and a sigil he recognized, Zarati Council. His lips pressed into a tight line as he unfolded the page. To honor your successful rebalancing of the eastern biomes, the Council of Zarati bestows upon you one of our remaining unbonded. She has been conditioned in silence, obedience, and care. May your seed complete the harmony you began. His stomach turned. He read it again, slower, though every word was already etched behind his eyes. Not a greeting, not a request, a ceremonial proclamation. They had gifted her, like pollen in a vial, like a mineral sample, like a favor owed and paid. He looked at her again. Her head remained bowed, but he saw it now. Each breath she took seemed measured, as if waiting for approval. Her hands trembled slightly, even in stillness. Victor backed away, stood, turned sharply, and crossed to the food alcove. He moved on instinct, not habit. He didn't want to touch her, didn't want to confront what they expected of him. So he did something else, something sane. He heated a bowl of nutrient root porridge, stirred it slowly as steam rose from the thick, pale mixture. He didn't look at her when he brought it back, just crouched and placed it within reach. "You're cold," he said quietly. "Eat, please." No answer, not even a blink. "I didn't ask for this," he added, his voice lower now. "And I don't want anything you haven't chosen to give." He stood, taking 2 steps back. His palms remained open, fingers spread like a surrender. Still nothing. But after a long pause, she shifted slightly. Her hands moved, slow, hesitant, and wrapped around the bowl. She brought it to her lips with practiced caution. Then she took her first bite. Victor saw it all, the small tremor in her hands, the speed with which she swallowed, as though expecting it to be taken away. She coughed once, tried to mask it, failed. He stepped forward without thinking. Careful, too fast. She flinched, not a subtle wince. Her whole body jerked back, arms raised to shield her face. The bowl clattered to the ground, porridge splashing across the mat. Victor froze mid-step. He didn't touch her. "I'm not going to hurt you." Her arm stayed up for another breath, 2, then slowly lowered. He exhaled. This wasn't obedience. It was trauma etched into muscle memory. He dropped to one knee and gently wiped the spilled food off the mat, saying nothing more. Letting her watch, letting her decide. When he finally rose, she was watching him. Her eyes, lavender gray and softly glowing, held no judgment. Just waiting. What had they done to her? Victor turned toward the desk and sat down, pulling open a data log to pretend to focus. The numbers meant nothing. He only needed space. Silence. She didn't speak. She didn't eat again. But eventually, she lay back down, still curled but less tightly than before. Her head rested on her forearm. Her breathing evened. It took over an hour before her shoulders stopped twitching at every movement he made. And just before he powered down the dome's main lights for the night cycle, he heard it. A whisper of a word. Not Zarati. Not human either. A name? He turned, but she was already asleep. Her body had relaxed in the smallest way. Legs no longer drawn so tightly. Arms no longer clenched. For the first time, she seemed not braced for harm. Victor watched her under the dome's bioluminescent canopy. The vines above them pulsed faintly with life, sensing breath, warmth, presence. This was no tradition, no honor, just a deeply dressed cruelty hidden in the ritual of diplomacy. He sat back in his chair, hands folded against his lips, breath caught in a knot he couldn't name. Who was she? Why was this still allowed? Why had they chosen him? Victor didn't sleep that night. Not really. But sometime near morning, he made his first decision. He wouldn't use her, wouldn't touch her unless she chose it. And if Zarati wanted her back, they'd have to take her from him. The dome was already awake by the time Victor stepped into the main chamber. Pale morning light streamed through the dew-streaked canopy, turning the green-filtered glow into a quiet forest shimmer. The air inside was thick with moisture, still clinging to the coolness of night, and laced with the faint scent of sterilized moss and fresh growth media. Victor moved without speaking. He hadn't slept much, maybe an hour, maybe none at all. His body was awake, but his mind hadn't settled. Something about having her in the same space, asleep on that woven mat, had tangled up thoughts he didn't even know were still alive in him. He stood at the far planter bed, sleeves rolled up, hands sunk elbow deep in the loam. The work was unnecessary. He'd pruned these root systems less than 40 hours ago, but he needed something to ground him, something that didn't flinch when touched, something that wouldn't look at him and wait for a command he'd never give. Behind him, silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind where breath is held, the kind that comes before judgment or after trauma. He turned his head slightly, just enough to see her out of the corner of his eye. She was still lying on the mat, exactly where she had been the night before. But now she was facing the room, not the wall. Her eyes were open, watching him. Her body hadn't moved, yet he could tell she was fully awake. The blanket he'd left over her was still in place, though she'd drawn it closer around her shoulders, wrapping it in a tight knot near her collarbone. Her golden hair, once neatly braided in ceremonial formality, was now loose, a disheveled curtain half hiding her face. Victor looked away, not out of guilt, but to give her space. Let her choose when to exist in this room. He returned to the planter, brushing away a layer of overgrowth, carefully slicing through a tangle of phototropic tendrils that had wrapped around a nutrient stem. The movement was meditative. Clean. No questions. Just responses. But still, he felt her eyes on him. Curious, hesitant, afraid. He didn't blame her. Victor had been on Zarati for 3 years. By choice, technically, but the kind of choice one makes after burning bridges. After Trio Station, after the inquiry, after being cleared and still marked. No one forgets the name of the man who almost accelerated a gene collapse on a colonial food world. He hadn't done it, but he hadn't stopped it in time either. That's what made this planet perfect. No team, no press, just roots, fungi, vines, and silence. Until now, he heard movement behind him. Not loud, not sudden. Bare feet brushing softly against the composite floor. The sound made something in his chest shift. He kept his hands in the dirt a moment longer, unsure whether to speak. Then he stood slowly and turned. She was upright now, still wrapped in the blanket, arms crossed under the fabric like a barrier. She didn't speak, but her eyes, those strange lavender gray eyes flecked with soft gold, watched him without blinking. He didn't step closer. Instead, He gestured gently toward the table. "I want more porridge. If you're hungry." She hesitated. Her gaze flicked to the table, then back to him. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then she walked, soft, slow steps, to the chair across from where he usually ate. She didn't sit right away. Her hands hovered above the surface, uncertain. Then she pulled out the chair, lowered herself carefully, and folded her legs beneath her in a neat, practiced motion. Victor moved with equal care. He placed a bowl in front of her. No fanfare. No gesture of ownership or invitation. Just offering. She picked up the spoon, slowly, as if expecting it to be taken from her. She stirred once, twice, then lifted a small portion to her lips. Swallowed. Waited. He watched her, not for control, but to make sure she didn't choke again. She didn't. After 2 more bites, she spoke. One word. "Sarah." Victor blinked. "Is that your name?" She nodded, but it was so faint he almost missed it. "They called me other names," she added softly, "but I chose that one." Victor sat back in his chair, his heartbeat catching on something he hadn't expected. Chose. That word carried weight. He didn't ask what the other names had been. Didn't want to hear what she'd been called by people who saw her as a gift. "Sarah," he said slowly, "thank you for telling me." She kept eating, slower now, with something approaching rhythm. He watched the way she held her hands, close to her body always. The way her spine remained perfectly upright, even when she relaxed her shoulders. Not ease. Training. Small marks lined her forearms. Symmetrical, faintly raised. Not scars from injury, but from ritual. He'd seen similar designs in council records, traced into the flesh of and bonded during submission rites. They were shaped obedience. Physical memory. His hands curled slightly into fists beneath the table. After a few minutes, she placed the spoon down and sat quietly. "I'll be working outside today," Victor said, more to fill the space than to ask anything of her. Southern Quadrant. The vines out there are sensitive. They react when people walk too close. Curl up like they're shy. Her lips twitched slightly. He couldn't tell if it was the start of a smile or just the idea of shy vines catching her off guard. "You're welcome to come," he added, "but you don't have to. It's just safer than staying in here alone if you want to move around." She didn't answer, but when he stood and reached for his field bag, she rose too. Not a word, not a request, just a choice. It was more than he expected, more than anyone had probably allowed her in a long time. And as they stepped out into the filtered light of Zarati's jungle morning, Victor glanced sideways once, just once, and saw it. Her gaze tracking the path ahead. Watching, not waiting. Not yet free, but not afraid to follow. Zarati's southern quadrant pulsed with quiet, humid life. The air outside the dome was thick with the scent of moist bark, rich soil, and sweet spores drifting lazily through shafts of filtered sunlight. Broad-leafed vines draped over the path like hanging veils, their edges curling subtly toward movement. Reactive, cautious, almost shy. Victor stepped carefully through the undergrowth, a long-handled sensor pack slung over one shoulder, his boots brushing against bioluminescent moss that pulsed faintly beneath each step. He'd walked this path dozens of times before, but today felt different. Slower, sharper, because she was walking behind him. Not beside him yet. Not close enough to suggest comfort, but not far either. Her pace matched his almost precisely, each step measured. She didn't speak, didn't fidget, but he could feel her presence, like gravity, steady, fragile, and constant. Sarah. He tried the name again in his mind. It fit her far better than anything the council might have carved into her. A soft, flowing name. Chosen. She hadn't asked where they were going. Hadn't even questioned the gear in his hands. But every time he glanced back, he caught her watching. Not in fear this time, but curiosity. Quiet observation. The kind of look someone gives a strange animal that might be dangerous, but also might not be. Victor crouched beside one of the outer beacon vines, brushing aside a curtain of leaf veins. "This one's growing too fast," he murmured to himself, not really expecting her to answer. Still, she stepped forward. Slowly, her fingers trailed just above the plant, not touching, hovering. The vine pulsed faintly beneath her hand, curling back on itself like a drawn breath. They react to attention, he said, softer now. Light, movement, emotion, if the stem currents are strong enough. She tilted her head, studying the curl of the leaf, the way it folded like a closing hand. It's afraid. Victor looked at her. You can tell. She didn't meet his gaze, but nodded once. He turned back to the vine. Most researchers don't think they process fear. Only reaction and reinforcement. But I'm not sure. There's a pattern in the sap flow, changes subtle. Like hesitation. Sarah didn't say anything, but she knelt beside him, mirroring his position. Her fingers didn't tremble this time. She didn't reach out, but she was close enough that he could feel the warmth of her body beside him. Victor swallowed and returned to his work. He connected a stabilizer to the vine's base, careful not to pierce the root too deeply. A faint vibration traveled up through his fingers as he adjusted the contact plate. It was like the plant shivered. When he glanced at her again, she was watching him. Not the vine. Him. Not studying. Not flinching. Just present. He cleared his throat. You don't have to stay out here. If it's too humid, I can set the perimeter shield to guide you back. She shook her head once. Then, after a pause, it's quiet here. Victor nodded. That's why I came. She looked at him then. Really looked. Were you sent here as punishment? The question struck harder than he expected. No, he said after a moment. Not officially. Sarah lowered her gaze again, but her expression didn't close off. Victor wiped his hands on a cloth and sat back on his heels, letting his breath ease out. I was part of a research team on a station orbiting Trios Prime, he said, voice low and level. We were testing accelerated crop cycles for frontier colonies. I was in charge of verifying genome integrity. I missed a protein drift. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to cause panic. I wasn't fired, but trust evaporates fast in labs, especially when food is involved. Sarah listened without speaking. Her hands rested calmly on her lap, but her posture remained perfectly still. It was the stillness that told him she understood. The kind that isn't indifference, is waiting to see if you'll break while speaking. He continued. After the hearings, I requested reassignment. Somewhere far. Somewhere green. Somewhere no one asks you to explain your presence at the table. You're still explaining, she said softly. He glanced at her. There was no sarcasm in her voice. Just truth. Victor gave a faint, tired smile. Old habits. They worked in silence for a while after that, him logging plant growth rates and recalibrating beacon signals, her simply observing. At one point, she reached toward a leaf that had drifted too close, and when her fingertips brushed its edge, the plant shuddered and bloomed, unfurling into a soft spiral of glowing white filaments. Sarah inhaled sharply, not in fear, in awe. Victor straightened. That one's rare, he said. They only bloom when they detect resonance from unfamiliar organic patterns. She looked at him, eyes wide. So it likes me? I think it sees you. The words left his mouth before he could stop them. Something changed in her expression. Not quite a smile. Not quite a frown. Just a softening. A crease at the corner of her mouth. A breath caught. They started walking back toward the dome as the sun shifted in the sky, filtered through the dense canopy. The warmth thickened, heavy and fragrant with plant oils and pollen bursts. Halfway down the path, Sarah slowed. Victor turned. You all right? She didn't answer immediately. Then she said, You offered me food. A name. Space. Victor waited. Sarah took a breath, her voice quieter than before. But you never asked me if I wanted to stay. Victor froze. He hadn't. He realized it all at once. Not out of cruelty, but because somewhere deep down he had assumed the decision had already been made for her. That offering kindness in a cage still meant it was a cage. I'm sorry, he said sincerely. Sarah's shoulders relaxed. Not fully, but noticeably. Then she said, I don't want to leave. He nodded once, throat tight. Then you won't. And together, they walked the rest of the way home. The sun had dipped low behind the tree line, casting long, golden shadows across the research dome. Inside, the air buzzed softly with the quiet hum of equipment running in idle mode. Bioluminescent plants along the perimeter began to glow, their gentle light painting the walls in pulses of soft green and blue. Sarah sat near the edge of the room, legs folded beneath her, hair draped over one shoulder like liquid gold. She wasn't curled in on herself anymore, not withdrawn. She wasn't speaking yet either, but something had changed. There was weight to her presence now, a growing substance in the way she held herself. Victor noticed it too. He'd felt it during the walk back. Not just her choice to follow, but the deliberate stillness that had replaced her earlier defensiveness. She was choosing this, not because she had to, not because she was told to, but because it was hers to choose. He knelt by one of the nutrient beds and checked the fungal bloom readings. The numbers were steady. The environment was thriving. But it wasn't the plants holding his attention tonight. He glanced back at her. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked suddenly. Her voice, quiet as it was, carried clearly in the domed silence. Victor blinked. "Miss what?" She hesitated, then clarified. "Where you were before. The station. The other humans." He sat down slowly, wiping his hands on a cloth. "I thought I would. At first I did. But the longer I was away, the more I realized what I really missed wasn't people. It was purpose, trust, the feeling that what I did mattered to someone." Sarah nodded, but her expression shifted. Something in her eyes dimmed slightly. He tilted his head. "You?" She looked down at her hands, fingers loosely laced together. "I don't know what it's like to miss something freely. We weren't allowed to want. Missing something meant you remembered it. Remembering meant it had meaning. We were taught to forget." Her words weren't bitter. They were facts, recited from a place deeper than anger. Victor leaned forward. "You don't have to answer this if it's too much. But what was your life like before?" She paused. Then, slowly, she lifted her gaze. "I was born in a cradle house, one of the breeding centers on the central continent. My mother was part of the artisan caste, but she fell out of favor. No father I know of. They separated infants early, categorized by genetic markers, aesthetic viability, docility. Those who met bonding criteria were assigned to the unbonded program." Victor listened without interrupting. "They taught us language, posture, protocol. But we weren't allowed to speak unless instructed. We were graded on compliance. Touch without expression was rewarded. Eye contact was corrected. Wanting was discouraged. A breath escaped her lips, quiet, steady, but full of everything she hadn't said. I wasn't a person. I was a symbol, a gift meant to say something about someone else." Victor's jaw tightened. He wanted to say something, anything, but words felt too shallow, too hollow in the face of what she'd lived. "I tried once," she added, barely above a whisper, "to run. I was maybe 12 cycles old. I didn't even make it past the outer corridors. They didn't punish me physically. They removed my name. It was erased from the record. I was instructed to respond only to commands. No identity, just function." Victor swallowed the knot rising in his throat. "And then," she continued, "they told me I had been chosen. Not for bonding, not for partnership. As a gift, a reward, and that I was lucky." "You weren't," Victor said, his voice quiet but firm. "And they were wrong." Sarah looked at him for a long time. Something subtle shifted behind her expression, like a breath she hadn't allowed herself to take finally made it to her lungs. "What about you?" she asked. "You told me about the station, but before that, before the scandal, who were you?" Victor leaned back, resting his forearms on his knees. The question cut deeper than he expected. "I was a prodigy," he said after a moment. "Top of my class. Published young. The kind of kid professors write recommendations for before they know your name. I believed in systems, in the idea that life, biology, ecosystems, even human behavior, could be mapped, predicted, controlled." He smiled without humor. "And then I watched an entire agricultural module collapse because I overlooked a variable. I didn't lose my job, but I lost every ounce of certainty I'd built my identity on. Suddenly, I wasn't the brilliant young scientist. I was the guy who made everyone nervous at meetings." "Is that why you came here?" He nodded. Zarati was open, remote, quiet, and the idea of starting over without anyone expecting anything of me It felt like survival. Sarah was silent for a moment. Then she said, "You came here to be invisible." Victor looked at her. "And they sent me here to disappear," she added. Their eyes met. It wasn't just understanding. It wasn't pity. It was recognition, a mirrored ache in different shapes. "I don't want to be invisible anymore," she said. "You aren't," Victor answered. "Not to me." The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It wrapped around them like warmth, like safety. Sarah stood, crossing the room in slow, measured steps. She sat beside him, not too close, not demanding, but with intention. "I don't know who I'm supposed to be," she said quietly. Victor didn't respond right away. Then he offered, "You don't have to be anyone except who you choose. And you can take your time." She looked at him, then down at her hands. After a moment, she whispered, "I think I want to remember who I was before they taught me to forget." Victor nodded. "Then we'll start there." The knock came at midday, just as the heat outside pressed against the dome like a living thing. Victor was calibrating the water flow regulators beneath the hydroponic panel, his sleeves rolled up, forearms streaked with soil and nutrient film. He barely heard the chime, soft, deliberate, too formal to be a warning, too composed to be casual. He wiped his hands clean on a cloth, rose slowly, and moved to the airlock panel. Through the tinted glass, two figures waited. One tall, clad in a silver diplomatic vest with the crest of the Zarati Council woven into its front panel. The other shorter, leaner, standing a half step behind, the kind of posture reserved for security. Not a routine visit. Victor keyed the door open. "DR. Mayor," the envoy greeted, voice smooth and measured. "I hope this isn't an inconvenience. I'm Luthen of the council delegation, here to conduct a routine wellness check regarding our prior cultural exchange." Victor didn't move. "You mean Sarah?" A faint smile tugged at the corners of Luthen's mouth. "If that's the designation she prefers." "She's not a designation." "Of course. May we come in?" Victor stepped aside, saying nothing. The pair entered slowly. Luthen's eyes moved across the dome's interior like a scanner, taking in the tidy supply crates, the control consoles, the sleeping area, and then settling on Sarah. She stood near the rear wall, spine straight, arms folded carefully in front of her. Her hair had been tied back into a loose braid she'd done herself that morning, one of her new routines. She said it helped her feel like she had a shape, a choice. Today, it shimmered under the dome light like a thread of captured sunlight. Luthen offered a polite nod. "You're looking well and bonded." Victor took a step forward. "She has a name." "I'm sure she does," Luthen said, tone cordial. "However, until her classification is updated through the official channels, her status remains council-bound." Sarah didn't speak, but her fingers tightened ever so slightly at her sides. "What do you want?" Victor asked, his voice lower now. "As I said, we're conducting a check-in. Certain and bonded from the last cycle have remained unclaimed. There's been some confusion about your intent. The council assumed full integration had occurred, but the records show no confirmation of acceptance. No legal declaration. No bonding mark. Not even a transfer of name." Victor felt his chest tighten. "You're here to take her back." "If she remains unused," Luthen replied, his tone still maddeningly calm, "she must be reassigned." Victor stepped in front of Sarah before he even realized what he was doing. "She's not an asset. You misunderstand. The program was designed." "I know what it was designed for," Victor snapped. "Diplomatic offerings, cultural leverage. A civilized way to call it ownership." Luthen raised an eyebrow. "Then perhaps you also understand that, in the absence of formal declaration, her return is mandatory." Silence stretched. Victor turned slightly, catching Sarah's eyes. There was fear there, but something else too. Not the frozen stillness she'd carried when she first arrived. This was different. A question in her gaze. "What do I do?" She had asked for the right to choose. And now, she was waiting to see if he'd let her. He swallowed, then turned to Luthen. "I've integrated her into my station," he said, voice steady. "She performs tasks, maintains order, provides insight into local flora that your sensors can't replicate. That meets every requirement your guidelines mandate." Luthen paused. "You're asserting utility." I'm asserting presence, Victor replied. Still, without declaration. She is not unbonded. She is Sarah. She gave me her name, and I accepted it. Luthen glanced at Sarah. Did you? She nodded once. It was small, but it was enough. The envoy hesitated. The other figure, silent until now, shifted ever so slightly. A subtle tension, readiness to act. Victor saw it, and then Sarah did something she hadn't done before. She stepped forward. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but clear. If you take me, she said, you won't erase what I've learned. I will still remember who I became. Even if you remove my name again, I will find it. The weight of her words settled into the room like a stone dropped into still water. Luthen studied her for a long moment. Then, with the same unshakable civility, he gave a short bow. Very well. We'll file this interaction as a confirmed voluntary pairing. A formal record will follow for final signature. Victor didn't move until the airlock sealed behind them. Only then did he let the breath out of his chest. Sarah remained still, eyes fixed on the door long after they were gone. You didn't have to say anything, Victor murmured. I would have stopped them. She turned to him. I know, but I needed to say it. Victor walked over and sat beside her on the storage bench. They didn't speak for a while. Eventually, she broke the silence. I was afraid you'd hesitate. I did, he admitted. She nodded slowly. But you didn't stop. I won't. She leaned her shoulder into his, not heavily, just enough to feel that he was there. Solid. Real. I don't want to belong to someone, she whispered. I want to belong with someone. Victor didn't answer. He just reached over and took her hand, carefully, gently. This time, she didn't flinch. The sky outside the dome had deepened into violet, the first true night since the council's visit. Warm dusk light filtered through the overhead canopy, flickering across the floor in shades of lavender and gold. The jungle beyond was alive with soft, rhythmic calls from unseen creatures, their distant voices echoing like memories through the trees. Inside, it was quiet. Victor stood at the edge of the hydroponic beds, hands resting on the rim, gaze unfocused. He wasn't tending the plants. Not really. His thoughts drifted, looping back to the moment Sarah had stepped forward to speak for herself. The way her voice had filled the space. Not loud, not angry, but undeniable. He had seen the change in her coming, but not like that. Not with that fire. It stayed with him now, even as the dome's artificial cycle slid into night. She hadn't just stood up to them. She'd chosen him, and more importantly, chosen herself. And that choice had changed everything. Sarah was sitting on the woven mat near the living console, her knees drawn to her chest, arms wrapped around them. Her eyes weren't distant this time. They were focused, awake. Every breath she took seemed purposeful, like her body was adjusting to the weight of finally having control over itself. Victor approached slowly, pausing a few paces away. You hungry? He asked gently. She looked up. A little. I made that broth you said you liked. The one with the sourroot. Her mouth curved into the hint of a smile. You remembered. Of course I did. He stepped into the small galley and returned a few minutes later with 2 bowls. He handed hers over without ceremony, then lowered himself to the floor across from her. They ate in silence for a while, steam rising in thin curls between them. After a few sips, Sarah set her bowl aside and met his gaze. You were afraid today. He didn't deny it. Yes. She nodded, thoughtful. So was I. But I wasn't sure if I'd speak until I saw you stand in front of me. That's when I knew. Knew what? That you'd never speak for me if I didn't want you to. And that you'd never let them take me without a fight. Victor's jaw tensed. He stared down at the bowl in his hands, the broth slowly cooling. They didn't see you, he said. Not really. They only saw a protocol, a role to be fulfilled. I wanted to tear the system apart in that moment. She studied him. Why didn't you? He looked up, eyes steady. Because I realized something worse. If I fight for you without letting you fight for yourself, I become part of that system too. The silence between them changed. Not heavy, just honest. Sarah leaned back, resting on her hands, eyes turned upward toward the dimly glowing ceiling. When they erased my name, I stopped believing there would ever be a day when someone would see me and not see what I've been trained to be. Victor watched her. I saw you the moment you flinched away from my hand. Not because you were weak, but because you were trying to stay whole. She looked at him again, eyes shining, though not with tears. I don't feel broken anymore. I don't think you ever were. That time she did smile, real and unguarded. Victor reached for her bowl, setting both dishes aside. He didn't reach for her, didn't close the space. He simply sat still, allowing her the choice again. After a moment, she crawled closer, slow but sure. Her hands moved first, one resting on the floor between them, the other lightly brushing against his forearm. He looked down at her fingers. They no longer trembled when they touched. Her voice was soft. What happens now? Victor swallowed, pulse quiet and steady. That's up to you. She didn't answer with words. She leaned into him, pressing her forehead gently to his. Her breath mingled with his, warm and steady. For a moment, neither moved. No hunger, no command. Just closeness born from trust. Then she kissed him. It wasn't tentative. It wasn't desperate. It was a quiet, deliberate promise. Victor's hand rose, cradling the side of her face, fingers threading lightly through the edge of her hair. Her skin, ever luminous, seemed to glow brighter with the contact. When they parted, she remained close, eyes still closed. I was always waiting for someone to want me without needing me, she whispered. I didn't know that could exist. Victor exhaled through his nose, voice low and certain. It does. You're not here to fill a role. You're here because I see you. I want you, not what they gave me, not what they expected from you. Just you. She didn't pull away. Instead, she rested her head against his chest, her arms wrapping around his middle. He held her carefully, as if learning a language with his hands. The vines growing along the dome's frame began to bloom, pale light spilling from fresh petals, reacting not to temperature, not to water, but to the quiet harmony between two bodies finally free from silence. Night settled fully outside, but within the dome, warmth radiated in layers, skin against skin, breath shared, fears unwound. It was not the end of their fear, but it was the beginning of something greater. She had once been trained to belong. Now, for the first time, she belonged nowhere but here. Morning filtered through the canopy in quiet waves, turning the dome's curved ceiling into a living mural of light and shadow. The vines above them stirred faintly as warmth crept into the space. The air was thick with the scent of ripening fungal blooms and fresh-cut greenery, life pulsing at the edges of their solitude. Sarah moved quietly through the main chamber, her bare feet silent against the smooth floor. Her hair was damp, pulled into a loose knot at the nape of her neck. She had just finished washing, taking her time, no longer out of obligation, but because it felt good to care for herself. She was wearing one of the fitted research uniforms Victor had resized for her. It was practical, comfortable, and hers. She paused beside the console, brushing her fingertips over the glass, where the latest field logs flickered in soft green lines. She'd started learning how to read them a few days ago, not because anyone told her to, but because the numbers felt like a new kind of language, one she could choose to speak. Victor stepped into the room with a slow stretch, hair still tousled from sleep, a slight bruise darkening the inside of his forearm from where a retrieval drone had struck him the day before. He didn't cover it. He wasn't hiding anything from her anymore. You're up early, he said. So are you. He smiled. Couldn't sleep. She watched him cross to the side panel and begin making tea. His movements were relaxed, unhurried, the kind of ease people only shared when they knew they were safe. We've been different since the council left, she said softly. Victor looked at her over his shoulder. Different how? I don't brace anymore, she said. When I move, when I eat, when you reach for me, I don't flinch. I used to think stillness meant safety. Now it just feels like absence. He handed her a mug, the ceramic warm between their palms. And now, I think I'm finally present. Fully. Victor set down his own cup and leaned against the counter beside her. I was thinking about the registry, he said. They'll expect a follow-up. Some form of confirmation. She nodded. I know. You don't have to agree to anything. You're not beholden to me or to their language. I want to, she said, her voice firm. But not because they asked, because I choose it. He studied her, the clarity in her gaze, the absence of fear. She wasn't surviving anymore. She was living. I want to enter my name, she added, stepping closer to the console. Not as property, not as a designation, just as a person. Victor nodded. We can do that now. He unlocked the console and stepped back, giving her space. She hesitated for a breath, then placed her hand on the scanner. The screen blinked to life. The prompt read, Identify, designation, or given name. She typed slowly, Sarah Linii. Victor tilted his head. Linii, in the old Zerati dialect, it means one who wakes. It was my mother's second name. They never let me keep it. A pause. I'm keeping it now. The next prompt appeared. Status, and bonded/claimed/registered/other. She glanced at him. What do we call this? Victor thought for a long moment. What do you want to call it? Sarah inhaled deeply. Not bonded, she said. Not claimed. Not just registered. Something else. She typed. Status, chosen. There was no protocol for it. No drop-down menu. Just a blinking cursor. And yet the system accepted it. Entry confirmed. Biorecognition linked. Sarah Linii. Active. Citizen. Sentient. Sovereign. The console pulsed once and dimmed. Victor let out a long breath. There it is. Sarah stepped back and leaned against him lightly, her hand resting against his chest. I feel like I just took back a lifetime. You did. He wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her in gently. Their bodies fit together with the kind of ease that had nothing to do with choreography and everything to do with trust earned one day at a time. I was thinking, she said, we should plant something today. Victor raised an eyebrow. More fungus. No, something with color. Something that doesn't just survive, but grows for beauty. He smiled. That's not very utilitarian. Exactly. They worked side by side for the next hour, clearing a corner of the dome's inner garden bed. She selected the seeds, bright-petaled pollinators that the system had flagged as ornamental but biologically inefficient. She didn't care. She wanted them anyway. Victor dug carefully, setting the soil in neat lines, while Sarah pressed the seeds into the dirt with reverent precision. When she stood, there was a smear of earth across her cheek. He reached to brush it away, and this time, she leaned into the touch. Later, as the sun dipped toward the jungle's edge, casting everything in warm copper tones, she stood by the open hatch and looked out across the dense green horizon. Victor joined her, fingers brushing hers as he slid his hand into hers. They'll ask, she said, if they send another envoy, if they check the logs. They'll want to know what happened here. He glanced at her. And what will you tell them? Sarah turned, meeting his gaze directly. I'll tell them that I was not taken. I was not gifted. I was not given away. She stepped closer, voice steady and bright. I chose this. I chose you. And I chose myself. Victor didn't answer. He didn't need to. Instead, he bent his head and kissed her, a quiet, lingering kiss that tasted of tea and earth and everything they'd built. In the distance, the vines on the dome's edge bloomed again, luminous petals opening like soft mouths to the sky. No alarms, no signals, just light, not obedience, response. Inside the dome, Sarah and Victor stood together, not as master and servant, not even as protector and protected, but as two people who had weathered silence, control, and erasure, and found in each other a reason to remain. She had once been delivered without a name. Now she carried two, one from her past and one from the future she was choosing, moment by moment, word by word, seed by seed. And this time, she was never going back. The rain had come in the early hours of morning, gentle, rhythmic, cleansing. It tapped softly against the dome's canopy like a heartbeat, blurring the jungle outside into shades of green and silver. Inside, the air was warm and quiet, thick with the earthy scent of moistened roots and blooming fungal beds. It had been several days since Sarah had entered her name into the registry, and with each passing cycle, something within the dome had shifted. Not abruptly, not loudly, but undeniably. Victor woke to the sound of her humming. Not music, something simpler. A tuneless, drifting sound that filled the air like breath itself. He lay still, eyes half open, listening to her voice carry through the living quarters, echoing softly off the walls. She was barefoot, wearing a thin wrap knotted at the waist, sleeves rolled up past her elbows. Her hair was still damp from washing, clinging in waves to the back of her neck. She was tending to the colored plants they'd started days ago, those defiantly unnecessary flowers that refused to be anything but beautiful. She misted them gently, whispering something too quiet to hear, and the petals glowed faintly in reply. He watched her from the bed for a long moment, then finally pushed the blanket aside and stood. She turned at the sound of his footsteps. Her smile was slow, sleepy, and utterly unguarded. "Good morning," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. He walked over, arms slipping easily around her waist. Her skin was warm from movement, from the humidity, from the life she now allowed herself to feel. "Morning," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You're up early." "The rain woke me," she said, but it didn't feel bad, just peaceful. He nodded, resting his forehead against hers for a moment. "You feel different lately." "I am different." They stood there in the stillness for a while, her hands resting gently on his chest, fingers tracing absent shapes against the soft fabric of his shirt. "Victor," she said at last, her voice quiet but firm. He pulled back enough to look at her. Her eyes, lavender gray with gold flecks, were steady, grounded. "I think I love you." The words didn't startle him. He didn't freeze or retreat into analysis the way he might have once. Instead, he searched her face, not for doubt or fear, but for truth. And it was there, clear as light. "You think," he teased gently, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. She narrowed her eyes just a bit. "Fine. I know I love you." He laughed softly, pulling her close again, his arms tightening around her. "I love you too." There was no ceremony in it, no dramatic crescendo, just two people who had walked through silence, through uncertainty, through the weight of unspoken pasts, and now stood in a quiet space they had carved out with patience, grace, and permission. "I don't know what this is supposed to look like," she whispered against his neck. "Neither do I," he said, "but we can keep making it." They spent the day not doing anything grand. They cooked together. He made the grain stew. She added a handful of wild spice root that turned the broth golden orange. They ate on the floor beside the garden bed, sharing spoons, brushing shoulders, sometimes laughing so softly the plants seemed to lean in, curious. They napped in the reading alcove, tangled under a blanket with a half-finished data tablet resting between them. Later, she painted. Not well, not with any plan, just smears of color on old polymer scraps while he cataloged samples nearby. When she finished, she showed him the mess she'd made. Chaotic, bright, and strangely beautiful. "I think I like messy things," she said. "You never were anything else," he replied. That earned him a mock glare and a kiss. That night, as rain began again and the dome dimmed into its soft, ambient glow, Sarah stood beside the sleeping mat, brushing her teeth with a fiber stick and humming the same tune from that morning. Victor was already lying down, one arm folded under his head, watching her. She crawled into the blankets and rested her head on his chest. "You said it first," she said suddenly. He chuckled. "No, you did. Technically, I said I think. You said it clean. Is that what we're doing now? Love semantics." She grinned. "Might as well. I never had the chance before." He ran his hand slowly down her back, over her spine, pausing at her waist. "I love you," he said again, this time without teasing, and her body stilled, like the phrase had landed in a place inside her that had never had words before. "I believe you," she whispered, "and I think I finally believe myself." The rain continued to fall outside, and inside the dome, two hearts beat in rhythm, not as savior and saved, not as a debt or destiny fulfilled, but as equals, as companions, as two people who had found not perfection, but presence. And that was enough. More than enough.